Insane double what happened here. Will shock you double pouting warning. Everyone knew each other. The townspeople exchanged friendly greetings as they passed by, and everything seemed calm and in place. The sky was clear, the birds chirped, and life moved forward at its usual peaceful pace. But there was something about today that felt off to Emily. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up whenever she walked down the street. The people she saw, her neighbors, the ones she had grown up with, seemed to be acting differently. A little too friendly, or maybe a little too distant. It was subtle, but it was enough to make her feel uneasy. Emily was just an ordinary woman, nothing special about her life. She worked as a cashier at the local grocery store, a job she had held for years. She had her regular routine: wake up, go to work, talk to a few friends, and head home. She was used to the normality of it all. But today, something in the air felt like a warning. As Emily walked through the town square, she spotted Mrs. Watkins, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down from her. Mrs. Watkins had always been kind, always had a warm smile, but today she was standing by her garden, staring into the distance, as if lost in thought. When Emily waved, Mrs. Watkins didn't seem to notice. She just kept staring ahead, her expression distant, as if she were looking at something only she could see. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Watkins?" Emily asked, stepping closer. The old woman snapped out of her trance and gave Emily a half-hearted smile. "Oh, yes, dear. Just thinking about old times. I'm fine, don't worry about me." But Emily could tell something was off. There was a strange, uneasy energy in Mrs. Watkins' voice. Emily brushed it off, telling herself it was nothing. After all, everyone had bad days, right? But even as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just Mrs. Watkins. It was the entire town. The usual smiles seemed forced, the usual chatter felt awkward, and the streets felt oddly quiet. When Emily reached the grocery store, the first thing she noticed was that her manager, Mr. Thompson, was acting strangely. He was always an upbeat person, always joking around with the employees. But today he was silent, his face stern as he worked. He didn't even say good morning when Emily arrived. He barely looked at her. "Everything okay, Mr. Thompson?" Emily asked, trying to break the silence. Mr. Thompson paused, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "Oh, yeah, just a lot on my mind, Emily. Nothing you need to worry about." But the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. There was something he wasn't telling her, something he was keeping to himself. Emily couldn't help but feel that whatever it was spreading through the town like a silent storm, ready to break at any moment. Later that afternoon, as Emily was stocking shelves in the back of the store, she overheard a conversation between 2 customers near the produce section. It was quiet, but she could make out some of the words. "Have you heard about the new family that just moved into the old Miller house?" one of the women whispered. The other woman replied in a hushed tone, "Yeah, I heard there. Not what they seem. Some strange things have been happening since they arrived." Emily froze for a moment, her heart racing. She hadn't heard about any new family. The Miller house had been empty for years, and no one had moved in since the last tenants left. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she walked over to the aisle to act casual as she pretended to straighten some cans on the shelf. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening under the surface. The women continued to whisper, unaware of Emily standing just a few feet away. "People are saying they've seen shadows in the windows late at night. Weird sounds coming from the house," the first woman said, her voice dropping even lower. "I don't know," the second woman replied nervously. "I heard they're part of something dangerous, like a cult or something." The word cult sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Her heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively looked around to see if anyone was paying attention. The idea of something so sinister happening in her quiet little town seemed impossible. It was the kind of thing that only happened in movies or in far-off places. The women's conversation continued, but Emily couldn't listen any longer. She was too distracted by the thought of the mysterious new family. Who were they? What were they doing in her town? As Emily finished her shift that day and began walking home, her mind was racing. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the town. The streets, once so lively, now seemed desolate. No one was out, and the silence felt suffocating. Even the usual sounds of the birds seemed muted, as if the town itself was holding its breath. She passed the Miller house on her way home, and the sight of it sent another chill through her. The house was old, its windows dark and uninviting. Emily could have sworn she saw movement inside, a shadow shifting across one of the curtains. Her pulse quickened, and she turned her head quickly to avoid looking at it any longer. What was happening in this town? Why did it feel like something was about to explode? Emily reached her house and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. But even as she sat down to eat dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling that she was on the edge of something big, something that would change everything. And she had a sinking feeling that whatever it was only just beginning. The following days felt like an endless loop for Emily. The town, which had always been a place of comfort and predictability, seemed to be slipping into something unrecognizable. Despite her best efforts to continue with her daily life, she couldn't shake the feeling that the town was slowly falling apart. The uneasy atmosphere lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. It all started with a phone call that changed everything. One evening, Emily was sitting on her couch, flipping through a magazine when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she asked, her voice betraying the nerves she was trying to hide. There was a long pause before a voice spoke. It was soft and raspy, as though the person on the other end had been crying or whispering in the dark. "You need to get out of town," the voice said, barely audible. "You need to leave before it's too late. They know you're asking questions, Emily. They're watching you." Emily froze, a chill running through her veins. The voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. It was one of those voices that lingered at the edge of her memory, but she couldn't quite remember who it belonged to. She opened her mouth to ask who it was, but the line went dead. A dial tone hummed in her ear. Her hand trembled as she slowly lowered the phone. She stared at the screen as if hoping the number would show up again, but it was gone. The call had vanished as quickly as it had come. It made no sense. Who would know her name? Who would warn her like that? The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She went about her day as usual, but every interaction felt forced. The people she passed on the street seemed to look at her differently, almost as though they were waiting for something. As she walked into the grocery store, she noticed that even the aisles felt smaller, more confined. It was as if the walls were closing in on her, making her feel trapped in a web of suspicion. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong, and she had to find out what. That afternoon, Emily made her way to the Miller house. She had passed by it countless times, but now it felt like it was calling to her. She needed to know what was going on behind those dark windows. Who were these new neighbors? And why did they make the whole town feel so different? The house loomed in front of her, old and weathered. Its windows were covered with heavy curtains, blocking out any trace of light. Emily felt a strange pull to it, as if the house was hiding something, or someone, that she needed to see. She took a deep breath and walked up the creaky wooden steps toward the front door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment she hesitated. It was crazy, wasn't it? Just showing up at someone's door uninvited. But the phone call, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, it had all led her here. She had no other choice. Before she could knock, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man with dark hair and a serious expression. His eyes narrowed slightly as they met hers. He was young, probably in his early 30s, but there was something about him that made him look older, as though he carried the weight of secrets that didn't belong to him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady and calm, but with an edge that made Emily's heart race. I was just curious about the house," Emily stammered. "I've seen you around town and I heard some rumors. I was wondering if—" He interrupted her with a soft but firm gesture, his hand slicing through the air as though to silence her. "Rumors, huh?" he said, his lips curling into a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "People around here like to talk." "I'm just trying to understand what's going on," Emily said, her voice more confident now. "There's something strange happening in this town, and I think you know what it is. I need to know the truth." The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. Emily felt the weight of his stare like a physical presence pressing down on her. She almost wanted to look away, but she refused to back down. Finally, he stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "You want answers, you've got them, but be careful, Emily. Once you start digging, there's no going back." A wave of unease washed over her as she stepped into the house. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of incense and something else she couldn't place. The walls were lined with dark wood, and there were strange symbols carved into the floors, like something out of an ancient ritual. She could feel the tension in the room, the kind that settled deep into your bones. "Sit down," the man said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. "I'll tell you what you want to know, but you have to understand something first." Emily sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady herself. "What's happening here? Why is everyone acting so strange?" The man sighed deeply and sat down opposite her, his expression growing more serious. "This town has always had its secrets," he began, his voice low and almost reluctant. "But it's not just about rumors or stories. There's something real happening, something that goes back much further than you can imagine." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made Emily's heart race. "There's a power here, a darkness, and it's been growing stronger. We, those of us who know the truth, have been trying to contain it, but it's slipping through the cracks. It's too late to stop it now." Emily swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "What kind of power? What are you talking about?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile again, but there was no warmth in it. "The kind of power that can change everything. The kind that can destroy everything if it's not controlled." He paused, and for a moment it seemed like the whole house held its breath. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, as though she were being drawn into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. "You need to leave, Emily," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The town is already lost. You're in danger." Before Emily could respond, the door slammed shut behind her, and the man was gone. The house, once full of mystery, now seemed empty and silent, as if it had never existed at all. Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. She had come looking for answers, but now she was more confused than ever. What had she just heard? What was happening to the town? And why had he warned her to leave? She knew one thing for sure. Whatever was going on, it was much bigger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. And she was already in too deep. The warning from the man at the Miller house haunted Emily long after she left. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. The strange symbols on the floor, the cryptic words he spoke, and the coldness in his eyes when he told her to leave. It all felt like a dream, a nightmare that she couldn't shake. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the answers she was looking for were just beyond her reach, hidden in the shadows of her quiet town. Over the next few days, Emily tried to go about her life as usual, but nothing felt normal. Her interactions with people were strained. Whenever she walked through town, it was as if the eyes of the entire community were upon her. People looked at her with suspicion, like they knew something she didn't. But they weren't saying anything. They just kept their heads down, their conversations halting and awkward whenever she was around. The atmosphere in the town was thick with tension, and Emily felt like she was suffocating in it. It was as if the town itself had been infected by some dark presence. The streets that used to be full of life now felt eerily empty, and every corner she turned seemed to reveal another secret. She began to notice little things, things that hadn't been there before. People she knew from the store or the post office would stop talking when she walked in, their voices dropping to a whisper, as though they were trying to hide something. Even the air felt heavy, as though it were filled with the weight of unsaid words. Emily knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The phone call, the warning, the strange symbols in the Miller house, it was all connected. She needed to know the truth, no matter the cost. That afternoon, Emily decided to confront the one person she hadn't spoken to yet, Mr. Thompson, her boss at the grocery store. He had seemed so distant lately, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. He had been acting strange ever since she overheard him talking about the new family at the Miller house. Maybe he could help her understand what was really going on. Emily walked to the back office of the store where she knew Mr. Thompson would be. She found him sitting at his desk, staring out the window, lost in thought. He didn't notice her enter. "Mr. Thompson?" Emily called softly, trying to get his attention. He looked up, his expression unreadable. For a moment he just stared at her, and Emily couldn't tell what was going through his mind. Then, with a sigh, he motioned for her to sit down. "Emily, I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice low. "I've been meaning to talk to you." Emily's heart raced. "Talk to me about what?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You've been asking a lot of questions, haven't you? About the Miller house, about the rumors. You want to know the truth." Emily nodded. "I do. I have to know what's going on. This town, something's wrong. I can feel it. Everyone is acting so strange. I need answers, Mr. Thompson's face grew even more serious. He looked around as though checking if anyone was listening before speaking again. "There are things happening here that go beyond your understanding, Emily. Things that no one is supposed to know, but you've gotten too close. You're asking the wrong questions." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Mr. Thompson hesitated, and for a moment Emily thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've heard the stories, haven't you, about the old families in this town, the ones that came before, the ones who were here long before the rest of us. There's a reason this town is so isolated, so quiet. It's because of them." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, because of them?" "They were part of something, something ancient," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice shaking slightly. "A cult, if you want to call it that, but it was more than that. It was about power, dark power that came from forces we shouldn't have meddled with." Emily's mind raced. "A cult, but what happened to them? Where are they now?" "They never left," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice low and strained. "They're still here, watching, waiting. And they've been manipulating things in this town for generations. The Miller family, they're just the latest in a long line of people who have been chosen to carry out their will." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "The Miller family, they're part of this?" "Yes," he said, his eyes growing darker. "They're the ones who have been pulling the strings, and now that you've started asking questions, you're in danger." The room seemed to close in on Emily as the weight of his words settled over her. She had thought she was getting closer to the truth, but now it felt like she had uncovered a whole new layer of mystery. The town, the people she had known her whole life, the house on Miller Street, it was all tied together in a way she couldn't have imagined. "What do I do?" Emily whispered, feeling more lost than ever. Mr. Thompson stood up from his desk and walked over to the window. He looked out, his face pale and tired. "You need to leave, Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "There's nothing more you can do. Once you've uncovered this, there's no going back. They'll come after you just like they've done with everyone else." Emily's mind was racing, but she couldn't make sense of it all. Everything she had believed about her town was a lie. And now she was tangled in something far bigger than herself, something that threatened to destroy everything she knew. But there was one thing she couldn't shake, a feeling deep in her gut that she couldn't turn away now. She had come too far, asked too many questions. There was no turning back, no matter what danger lay ahead. "Maybe I can't leave," Emily said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "Maybe I'm meant to stop this, whatever it is." Mr. Thompson turned to her, his face filled with sorrow. "I hope you're ready, Emily. Because once you cross that line, there's no coming back." With those final words, he turned away, leaving Emily alone in the darkened office. As she walked out of the room, she couldn't help but feel like she had stepped into a world that she was never meant to understand. But there was no going back now. She had to see it through, even if it meant facing something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur. Emily's mind was heavy with everything she had learned from Mr. Thompson, but despite his warning, she couldn't just walk away. She had already uncovered too much. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to see this through, no matter the cost. The dark power in her town, the Miller family, and the strange symbols, it was all connected, and she couldn't let it go. Everywhere she went, Emily felt as if the walls were closing in on her. The people in town seemed to be watching her, as if waiting for her to make a move. There was no escaping it. The feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to rise up and consume everything, became stronger with each passing day. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Emily could almost hear the whispers of people speaking about her behind her back. One evening, as she walked home from the grocery store, Emily noticed something strange. The Miller house, which had always been dark and quiet, now had a light flickering in one of the windows. It wasn't just a regular light. It seemed to pulse, as though something inside was alive, breathing. She stopped in her tracks, staring at the house, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment she hesitated. It was already late, and the town was eerily quiet, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt to go back. Something was happening in that house. She had to know what it was. Without thinking, she turned and started walking toward the Miller house. Her footsteps echoed in the silent street as she made her way across the yard. The closer she got, the more uneasy she became. The house seemed to loom over her, as if it were watching her every move. Her heart raced, and she could feel the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. She was about to step into something she might not be able to walk away from. When she reached the front door, she paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She knew she was risking everything, but it felt like she had no choice. She couldn't stop now. She raised her hand and knocked 3 times. For a few moments there was no answer. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Emily was about to turn away when the door creaked open, and the man from before, the one who had warned her, stood in the doorway. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed by something darker than just the night. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice low and cautious. "I need to know what's happening here," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I can't walk away from this. I need answers." The man stared at her for a long moment, as if considering something. Finally, he stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of sorrow and resignation. Emily walked past him into the house. It was even darker inside than it had appeared from the outside. The air was thick, almost oppressive. There was a strange, metallic smell in the air, as though something had been burned recently. She could barely see anything, but she could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on her. "Where is everyone?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper as she looked around. "They're here," the man replied, his voice hollow. "They've always been here, watching. Waiting." Suddenly, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She could hear faint whispers like voices just beyond the reach of her hearing. It wasn't the wind or the house settling, it was something else, something far darker. The man led her through the hallway and into a large room at the back of the house. It was different from the rest of the house, well lit, clean, and oddly modern. But even here, there was a sense of unease, like something wasn't quite right. The walls were covered in old, faded portraits of people she didn't recognize, their eyes seemingly following her as she walked through the room. The atmosphere was heavy, thick, with a sense of dread that Emily couldn't explain. At the center of the room was a large table, and on it were books and scrolls, ancient and worn. They were written in a language Emily couldn't understand, the characters twisting and curling in strange patterns. In the middle of the table was a strange artifact, an ornate, silver medallion that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Its surface was etched with symbols she had seen before, the same ones that had been on the floor of the house. The same ones that had appeared in her dreams. "This is what they want," the man said, his voice soft but filled with bitterness. "The power that's been passed down through generations. The power that's kept this town bound to its secrets." Emily's pulse quickened as she stared at the medallion. It was the key to everything, she realized. The answers she had been seeking were right in front of her, but they came with a price. She could feel the weight of it, the responsibility, the danger. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what keeps them in control," the man said, his eyes darkening. "It's what keeps them alive, keeps them in power, and now it's your turn." Emily recoiled, her heart racing. "What do you mean, my turn?" The man stepped closer, his gaze fixed on hers. "You're the one they've been waiting for, the one who can carry the power forward. They'll stop at nothing to make sure you join them." Emily stepped back, fear rising in her chest. "No, I don't want any part of this. I didn't ask for this." "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice growing cold. "Once you've seen the truth, you're part of it. They'll come for you, Emily. They'll come for all of us." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. The room seemed to darken, and Emily could hear the faint sound of footsteps coming closer. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting for something. "They're here," the man said, his voice filled with fear. "We don't have much time." Before Emily could react, the room seemed to tilt, the floor shaking beneath her feet. The walls began to close in, the air thickening as if something were pressing against her. She could see shadows moving in the corners of the room, figures emerging from the darkness. The man grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "We have to go now." But before they could escape, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The shadows grew, their forms taking shape, and Emily realized with a cold chill that she was no longer alone. The town's dark secrets had found her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the shadows in the room grew thicker, pressing in on her from all sides. She couldn't tell how many of them were there, how many were waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of her vision. But she could feel their presence, their cold, suffocating energy surrounding her. The man who had warned her earlier stood beside her, his face pale, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. His grip on her arm tightened, and she could feel his pulse racing as though he, too, could sense the rising tension in the room. Every breath she took felt heavy, as though the very air had been sucked out of the space. "They've found us," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing hum in the air. "It's over. They know we're here." Emily tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but her mouth felt dry. She could hear the whispers again, faint at first but growing louder, clearer. The voices were everywhere, all around her, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. They seemed to be calling to her, beckoning her closer, pulling her toward something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They're the ones who control this town," he replied, his eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. "The ones who have been here for centuries. They're the ones who hold the power that keeps the town hidden, keeps it locked in its own darkness." Emily glanced around the room, her pulse quickening. But what do they want from me? The man looked at her with a sorrowful expression. They want you to join them. You're the key, Emily, the one they've been waiting for, the one who can carry on what they started. Emily's mind reeled. She couldn't process what he was saying. The idea of joining these dark forces, of becoming part of whatever they were, filled her with terror. But at the same time, she could feel the power in the room, an ancient energy, pulsing like a heartbeat, beckoning her. It was as if the house itself was alive, calling to her. "You don't understand," the man continued, his voice low and desperate. "Once you've seen the truth, you're already part of it. There's no going back. You can't just walk away from this. They won't let you." The shadows in the corners of the room began to stir, their forms shifting, swirling like smoke. Emily took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She could see figures forming within the shadows, tall, gaunt figures whose faces were hidden in the darkness. Their eyes, however, were visible, glowing faintly in the dim light like embers of a dying fire. The man's grip on her arm tightened. "They're coming. We don't have much time." Before Emily could react, the room seemed to grow colder. The shadows stretched toward her, reaching out with long, elongated arms that seemed to twist and writhe like serpents. Her heart raced and her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand firm. She couldn't give in to the fear. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. One of the figures stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate. As it emerged from the shadows, Emily could make out its features: pale skin, sharp features, and eyes that burned with an unnatural light. Its mouth opened and a voice, low and gravelly, spoke, its words echoing in the room. "You've come too far, Emily," it said. "There is no turning back now." Emily swallowed hard, her mind spinning. The figure was speaking to her, but it wasn't just speaking, it was commanding. She could feel its words sinking into her very soul, filling her with a sense of inevitability. It was as though her fate had already been decided, and there was no escape from it. The man beside her took a step back, his face pale and filled with dread. "It's too late," he whispered. "They're here." Without warning, the figure lunged forward, its long fingers reaching out to grasp Emily's arm. She tried to pull away, but its grip was too strong, too unyielding. The moment its fingers touched her skin, she felt a rush of coldness, an icy, otherworldly coldness that seemed to seep into her very bones. The room seemed to blur as Emily was pulled forward, toward the figure, toward the shadows that had surrounded her. The whispers grew louder, louder than ever before, filling her mind with images she couldn't quite understand, images of ancient rituals, of people dressed in dark robes, of eyes that watched from the darkness. It was like a flood of memories, memories that weren't hers, but that felt as if they were. "Stop," she cried out, her voice breaking. "I don't want this. I don't want to be a part of this." But the figure didn't stop. It only tightened its grip, pulling her further into the shadows. She could feel herself being consumed by the darkness, drawn into something she couldn't fight. Suddenly, the man who had warned her earlier stepped forward, his voice shaking with urgency. "You have to fight, Emily. You can't let them take you. You're stronger than this." Emily's heart raced. She wanted to fight. She needed to fight. But how could she? How could she fight something so powerful, so ancient, that had been controlling the town for generations? The figure's grip tightened even more, and Emily could feel the darkness closing in on her. It was overwhelming, too much to bear. But then, something inside her stirred. A flicker of resistance, a spark of defiance that she hadn't known was there. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was enough. With everything she had, Emily pulled herself away from the figure's grasp. She fought against the pull of the darkness, her body trembling but her will stronger than ever before. She pushed herself back step by step until she was free from the figure's grasp. For a moment the room went silent. The shadows seemed to pause as though they were waiting for something. Then Emily's voice rang out, steady and clear. "I won't let you control me," she said, her words filled with a strength she didn't know she had. "I won't be a part of this." The shadows began to retreat, fading back into the corners of the room. The figure hesitated, its glowing eyes still fixed on her. But it seemed to recognize something in Emily, something that couldn't be controlled. Slowly, it stepped back, its form dissipating into the darkness. The man beside Emily looked at her, a mix of awe and disbelief in his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. "You stopped them." Emily took a deep breath, her heart still pounding in her chest. The room was silent now, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting. The whispers had stopped, the shadows fading into nothingness. She was free. For the first time in days, Emily felt a sense of calm. The danger was over, but she knew this wasn't the end. There was still so much she didn't understand, so many questions left unanswered. But for now, she had stopped the darkness from taking over, and that was enough. As she walked out of the Miller house, the cool night air felt refreshing against her skin. The town, once shrouded in mystery and fear, now seemed just a little brighter. The shadows had been banished, at least for now, and Emily knew that no matter what came next, she was ready.